Yeah, don't worry about that, Rod. All right, hello everyone. We've got 3 or 4 people who are watching at the moment. We've got Stephen who says g'day, and Patrick. It's the only 2 people in the chat at the moment. I think we will just hang around for a minute or 2 and wait for people to join. G'day CSX Gaming. You'll see in the chat that I talked about internet issues. I think that's all sorted now. It was just that other family members were also streaming, especially my sister, who is currently isolating due to being a close contact of a COVID positive person. But all of that should be sorted now. I've told her to quit streaming for 2 hours and yeah, should be good. G'day, Adventuring with Matthew Jones. Up to 7 concurrent viewers. God, the point of a waiting screen is that people join then and we don't have to wait. But then people want to skip the waiting screen and just want to join, but we end up waiting anyway. It's the paradox of life. All right. They would be moving towards finishing exams, actually, the VCE students. Because, yeah, a few people that I know in VCE at that. CSX Gaming asks, what scale is the Flying Scotsman behind you? That is O scale, brass model. And I've got a carriage set, a 6-car carriage set, O gauge of course, upstairs. And then the Spirit of Progress, the reduced Spirit of Progress I've put up on the top shelf, if you can see it hiding in the top right corner. That's HO scale. I could only fit 4 carriages out of the typical 11 car set. So we've got S301, Sir Thomas Mitchell leading, and then I've got the guards van, I've got a 2nd class carriage, and then I've got the dining car and the parlour car, and that makes up my 4-car Spirit set. Rightio, I think, let me just switch to screen capture. Yes, say what you're going to say, Rod.
In many ways that matches the broad gauge daylight, because the parlour car was transferred from the Spirit to the daylight, and of course it was a much shorter train.
Although
it was diesel, never steam.
And we've only got 1 actual passenger carrying carriage. We've got a guard. 3 of the 4 carriages are auxiliary carriages.
Oh, right.
All right. Well, I'm ready to get started when you are.
All right. Hello, everybody. These presentations can be thrown together fairly easily because they're a bit warts and all. There was a request from the finish of Queensland 2 weeks ago that I do, first of all, my pre-Christmas trip, which was back to Brisbane, because in the year, I was 2nd year uni in 1968, and during the year it was announced that 6 north side tram lines would be closing. So despite the fact I'd just been to Queensland and was heading to Western Australia, I threw in this quickie to Queensland. So my last meeting at uni was on the Friday. Left Melbourne on the Friday night, spent Saturday chasing steam in the Newcastle area, on to Brisbane Limited that night, arrived in Brisbane on Sunday for the farewell day, and it was hectic. So this is in the Newcastle area, Port Waratah or Mayfield or Garrett on a coal train, and we will press on. So yes, a whole set. That's Waratah itself, where the at Hanbury Junction, where the coal lines dive underneath the passenger lines. Entry to Port Waratah. That coal stage on the right is for the steam locos involved in coal train running, whereas Broadmeadow is for the passenger operations. Oh, and regular freight at Broadmeadow. The Port Waratah was just for coal operation. They've got a 68, they've still got about 2 years of steam operation left. It was still, while not quite in its prime, it was still pretty active and a magnet for Victorians. Sorry. Now, this is say warts and all. You're getting everything in the directory. It's not a selection. So that was done to show the complicated wiring at Wollongabba Junction, with tram junction with a trolley bus intersecting over it and a railway intersecting the whole lot, but that railway wasn't electric. So, as a ceremonial gesture for this last Sunday of the Brisbane trams, they fished out the drop centre trams, which didn't normally run on a Sunday, and the Sunday schedules were designed for 4 motor trams, and needing to stop at every stop because all of Brisbane was out saving it, it was frantic. Now, as I say, they're not quite in sequence. These are I stayed on for the following week and chased the south side trams, and these are 2 trams coming around the corner from the depot to wait outside the cricket ground. What's it called in Brisbane? The cricket ground, whichever. So they're positioning. And there they are, occupying a running line. There's a whole set of stabling sidings around the block, and they weren't using them. Oh, of course it is Wollongabba. It's called, that's right, it's nicknamed the Gaba. And it's going to be an Olympic Games venue. An antique clerestory roof carriage. Oh, at Nambour. My captions do tell me everything. So this software shows the slides in the sequence in which they were last saved. And of course I didn't save them all in the sequence in which I took them. This is at the end of the Salisbury line, which I rode by tram, and there was a work Christmas party picnic in progress with a train on, I think that's portable track, it's not a permanent circuit. I think it was 10-inch gauge, 254mm. Yes, that looks like a trailer that brought all the equipment in. It really is temporary. So we're back to Newcastle here. I prepared this one for two different groups. One's a trucking group, because that's now quite an antique truck by today's standards, and the other's a petrol station group. And that was what it was towing. Still in the Mayfield area, a diesel coal freight. I think that came in off, is it the Belmont branch, south side of Newcastle, not nearly as intensive as the stuff up the Hunter, and I think it had been dieselised. Because the thing I noticed with all of my scanning, and I'm working on 50 years ago, is just how period those cars are now. They add not only to the atmosphere, they give you an indication of the era. Oh boy, we have now jumped to the far end, coming home again. We'll get the whole coverage yet. That's steam shunting at Toowoomba as I was on my way home from that quickie trip. I spent about 8 days away. And it's a BB 18 and a quarter. I think the B 18 and a quarters were all flat-sided. The BB 18 and a quarters had that slightly widened cab. And this was the surprise for me, and I was nearly out of film. We got to Toowoomba and the diesel came off, and on came a steam for the Interstate Express. And I was nearly out of film. Got to Warwick, and there was a Victorian photographer who said, "I've got a spare film." Just couldn't believe this. At the end of the 60s, and you could still get steam on the interstate main. Probably crossing our opposite number. We're going Brisbane to Wallangarra, and the other's Wallangarra to Brisbane. I suspect that that's Warwick. Oh, I know that it's Warwick. Oh, I've got the caption showing. Oh boy. Warwick again, but I don't know what I was on. Must have been a signal, not a coal stage. Perhaps it had a footbridge. So we didn't change Loco. He's just cut off so that he could get position under the water crane and then back on again. I've still not worked out the location. It's the middle of nowhere. It just happens to be a water tank, and we stopped. So, of course, I climbed out and got the photo. And they didn't worry.
Wouldn't be the same with today's management.
You're right. And in fact, there's all the speech that I haven't prepared for tonight. One of the reasons for showing you all of these things is just what we could do in that era. We had branch lines, we had freights in which you could ride in the brake van, and we had rail motors. And yes, it was open access to all depots. So the problem, of course, is we didn't have money, and we didn't have digital, and slides were expensive. Now that's interesting. We've seen that one before. Why has it come through it again? Because I have it in two different sizes. Now this is the famous Wollongabba Junction, which was, I think, 5 different directions for road. 3 of the roads had trams, two of them had trolley buses, and then the railway cut right across the middle. And back in the days, the steam loco depot for the south side suburbans was here at Gaba. All of the locos going on for suburban trains had to come across this intersection, and they batched them up. They'd bring 3 locos at the time as one move to make it work. But all of that's been bulldozed and is one of those inner suburban freeways now. So more of the complicated junctioning arrangements. In fact, the guy who requested Brisbane, has he joined tonight, Floyd?
I haven't seen Gordon's name in the chat. Gordon Ross, are you with us tonight?
Now, RM55 was famous. I think it was preserved for... It was ended up being preserved, and it may have been into preservation already by 1968. It's appeared in... ARHS runs it. It's been in assorted films made in Queensland. It's nicknamed Red Fred, because it's older than the... It's just about the oldest still running of that style in that era. The ones that were still in operation on branch lines were more modern type. We're back to Toowoomba. Again, this is now leaving Queensland. I had a uni mate who'd gone to Queensland for the holidays to stay with his parents, and I arrived in the right week. We not only got the trams, we went chasing trains to Nambour. I got invited to his sister's 21st. They were already scrapping the drop centres by burning them. And the vintage, the oldest of the buses, I think had also been withdrawn, but not yet scrapped, obviously. They got a whole fleet of new air-conditioned buses to replace the trams, and they also replaced a lot of older buses. That's a railway embankment behind. That's Toowong, Milton. It's the workshops for the tramway system. Milton, yep. I think I got photos before they were burnt, and 2 days later it was all happening while I was there. Now, this is the Sunday again. This is the hectic last day with drop centres running, packed with people. We spent the daytime. Remember, Brisbane Limited arrived at 9:50. We had from 9:50 until about 1800 to chase trams by car. Then we parked the car and rode trams for the evening. And we're on the last tram on the north side routes. Somebody had stolen the controller. It was a returned event. It meant we were the last departure from one of the 6 terminuses, and we were the last one into Light Street Depot. Now, we were with a gung-ho driver. The older versions had only handbrakes, no air brake. This guy had air braking, you see the control, but the driver was showing off and he was making his stops on the handbrake to prove that he still had the skill. There he is, driver Serraval. He signed my timetable, it's in my collection.
Rod, Gordon has just piped up. He is watching and he says he's loving the work shots.
As well? All right. Is Gordon a Queenslander?
He is.
Ah, right. He'll have a lot more of possible shows into the future. Anytime Floyd is unavailable, I've got a big backup collection. So here we are, we're now riding, and in fact, can we get it right? That's Stafford, ready to form the last through working to Barden. Then Barden was the last departure. Now that's a pub behind the tram, but the name isn't showing. It's been demolished, but it was not just a pub. I think it had that's the Railway Hotel, that's right. I did a whole spate of Railway Hotel photographs. That block, including the two adjacent medium rise, that's all the modern police headquarters for Brisbane. So I'm standing with my back to Roma Street Station.
Gordon says he's from Sydney originally, but loves Queensland.
Right.
And he says he's looking forward to seeing all future collections.
Right. Now, this is the following week. These are the south side routes, which were still running, and I tried to cover them all. Well, I did cover them all. They closed in April, and I was too busy with uni. I could not go back for the final weekend. And this tram 412, that's a cult number in the railway holiday from years ago, stems from St George and the Dragonet, and so you always photographed anything that had a 412 on it. I still haven't quite worked out what that is. Maybe the University at St Lucia, but from the back. This is taken on the normally freight-only connection between the south and the north side before we had a bridge over the for the passenger running. This is what is not Indooroopilly, Yeerongpilly to Corinda. So that's looking from one of the few trains. They did run a couple of trains in the peaks for the workers. So that's some aspect of the uni, I believe. Either that or it's Tennyson Powerhouse. Sorry, we are zigzagging all over the place. Back to Busy Wool and Gaba. That pub is gone, but it's been replaced with high-rise mixed building, which downstairs is a ground floor tavern with no character, and upstairs is residential. And you'll see this tram signal box up on the right to control this chaos. Now, I think that signal box is preserved. It may have been there was one of two in Brisbane, and one of the two is preserved at the Tram Museum at Ferny Grove.
Which was, of course, a destination of mine when I did my trip to Queensland.
Yep. And again, one of the reasons I'm showing this to what I believe is a reasonably young audience, that you can all have adventures like this. Floyd has, following my footsteps and Floyd's. In fact, I was going to talk about all-line tickets. I might when we get to Western Australia. I'm not sure how many of these we've still got to run. I haven't got a tally showing. How are we going on time, Floyd?
We've been going for about 25 minutes.
That's about right. This is about half the size of the Western Australians, and I think there can't be many more. So it looks like we're going to spend 30 minutes on Queensland, have a short break, pick up with Western Australia, which will be about an hour, and have a break halfway through Western Australia. Now this time we are at Barden, and the controller was stolen. Oh, and all sorts of bits were souvenired. There wasn't much tram left to rumble into the depot. I think all the windows had been... Well, did they have windows? Certainly the window bars had been removed. The hand grips had been removed. Anything portable had been removed. So this is now the Wednesday, stockpiling the withdrawn trams, ready to burn them. This is taken from a suburban train passing the workshops. You're seeing a lot of these photos twice because I'm just showing the whole directory. So you've got the original large scan and the smaller captioned web version, which has been posted to various places. Oh, and the lovely Victoria Bridge. And that was one reason for getting rid of the trams. They wanted to replace that bridge, which was the first of the, well, vaguely the first of the bridges over Brisbane River in the city. It did have a predecessor that got washed away. And then this was replaced with a modern one, and now the modern one is being restricted for buses only. Motor cars can't use it. Now that's the Kalinga Line, which was one of the earliest to close. It was a north side line, and when Paddington Depot burnt down, they closed either 2 or 4 lines forthwith, and that was one of them. Of course, the track has survived because it's in concrete, which was a specialty of Robert Risson, who was the general manager in the Brisbane Trams, got headhunted, became the general manager of Trams in Melbourne, and promptly concreted the tracks so we couldn't close the system, and got knighted. He's regarded as something of a saint in the tramway hobby. Oh, yeah. Golden Fleece, a vanished flag in the world of petrol. Just fact, I think that shop is still there and recognisable, but it's no longer a shop. It's been converted to be a house, as has happened to a lot of milk bars in a lot of cities, because what had been the shop becomes a nice large lounge room. And that was one of my favourites. They were very careful about how they demolished Light Street Depot and left this Trams Please showing. Any Queenslander will recognise what it had been. That was the soft drink brand Tristram's, and it was Tristram's Please. Because some of the Brisbane trams were the newest in Australia at that time. Melbourne hadn't started its Z project, and they had built more 4 motors after the Paddington fire, and they were known as Phoenix trams. And that 548 is a Phoenix. They've got that distinctive 2-tone livery. Belmont. Like most of those Brisbane arterials, the road has been widened to 6 lanes using the tramway space. Ferociously busy. This is New Farm, Ascot, quite classy suburbs now, very expensive. It's inner suburban Brisbane, trendy, the lot. Now, 6 days after the last drop centre, here I was photographing trams, and there was a nostalgic sound, a drop centre. This is the Cornwall Street link, which connected two tram routes and was used for changing over crews. People coming out of Ipswich Road Depot would drive this across the link, change over, and then this would drive back. It was not carrying passengers, but gee, it was nostalgic already, just 6 days on. Oh, because not only do they close 6 north side routes, that was the last weekend of drop centres. All drop centres were removed, so that was nostalgia. The shed in the distance is a railway facility. There was a goods yard there. In fact, it was the original South Brisbane terminus before South Brisbane Station and the high level line was opened. Then this survived mainly for coal going into the river or out of the river, one or the other. It was Brisbane's coal wharves for smaller ships. The big ones had to stay further downstream. It's the 1740 Maryborough. All of that railway arrangement has changed, and it's changed even worse. They modified this platform to take the standard gauge, and then they modified it again to remove the standard gauge and put in a busway, and the standard gauge uses that little bit that's visible behind this train, which was the original Roma Street station. This is a day picnic with my friend in his car. That shay is now preserved somewhere, but not in operational order. It was one of two on the... So this is various static locos at Moreton Central Mill, Nambour, out of season. The whole mill is closed. The site is now a shopping mall. And a lot, I think, what had been cane growing there is now out of suburban residential. But Nambour's commuter zone, equivalent to, say, Geelong or Ballarat in Victoria. The smaller of two, I think. There were 2 lifting span bridges here. I don't have all the details memorised. I've got photos from a friend of another one and photo from the web of one of these with the span actually lifted.
How many lifting span bridges in Australia are still able to be lifted today?
Below 20 and above 10. They're not all on the Murray either. New South Wales has several. One of them has only just been decommissioned, replaced with a high-level concrete bridge at Narooma, one of those south coast places. I think it's Clyde River. There's 3 style... Oh, look, now. We've just reached the end. It won't click any further. Right, how was that? 9:38. Just about 31 minutes. So I can change the screen quickly, but this is where we might have, what, 3-minute break for chat? toilet? Have a drink?
Yeah, I think break for... There's not much chat to respond to, but I think a quick break for drink, toilet, whatever, while you're changing folders will be good. I'll utilise it myself.
Right, and you'll get an advance here. I'm going to backtrack so that I'm actually starting at one end of the screening and not the middle. There we are. Right. I'll wait for the Floyd voice to resume. Toilet break myself. Ah. Oh. Ah. I'm back. Floyd. Oh no, Floyd's not back. He's muted himself. Yep.
Right, Rod, I'm back.
Okay. Ready to roll?
Ready to roll.
Right.
Actually, there's been a couple of questions before we get started. Patrick Robertson asks, why are power poles crooked in Queensland?
Must be the rainfall. They keep sogging over.
Matthew James asks, I'd love to know if Rod worked in the railway system or is he a tram and railway enthusiast? Or you're just an enthusiast?
Yeah. I did have relatives who worked in the railways, but it's only ever been a hobby for me, but a major hobby.
You were a maths and English teacher. Was your career?
Maths and science and computers, but in fact I was just coming to the studentship, and we'll pick up there. So I went to university on a teaching studentship, which gave me quite a nice living wage, which I spent on my railway hobby. My friends bought a motor car and used up all of their money on their motor car. I bought a motor scooter and put my money into my train travels. And 1968, I fired on all cylinders. I had several important holidays or events through 68. Easter, ARHS ran a steam tour to Mildura. I chased it on a motor scooter. I was still recovering my budget from my Grand Queensland trip, which we saw. For the whole of 68, I didn't buy lunch at uni. I was recovering my budget and spending it. And then in June, Queen's birthday, ARE ran a magnificent trip to Broken Hill. Not cheap, but was worth it. So now we've moved on, and then that Brisbane one was unexpected. So now we're into what I had planned, the grand adventure to Western Australia, building on my Queensland, and I'll try and talk as the photos go by. That was Watheroo again. That's the Midland Railway. One of the line was built under the land grant scheme and was private and didn't become part of Western Australian Railways until 1964. But now Western Australia was a bigger adventure than Queensland, because I'd been to Queensland in the 50s and we had relatives there. But Western Australia, you had that stumbling block, the Nullarbor. Not cheap. Everybody had to have a sleeping berth and meals, which was nice, but you had to pay for it all. And I was the first member of the eastern branch of the family to go to Perth since World War II. They rolled out the hospitality. In fact, I thought that was a pub when I did this crop. It's not. It's the council chambers. It's Narrogin, yeah. And again, the goal was to chase steam, and I was picking them off in the order in which they were fading. Western Australia still had steam in two major pockets. Now, this is not Western Australia. Remember, these are all out of order. This is Port Augusta on the way across. I had half a day there. Those are two L-class locos. They were built for China. The communist government took over. They were never delivered. Some of them were re-gauged for... 10 of them went for South Australia, re-gauged. 10 of them went to Commonwealth Railways, and I believe they never turned a wheel in service. These were two of the survivors. So these are now my half day at Port Augusta. What I did, I'd gone across on the overland, been picked up by friends, we chased trains. Then on Monday morning I was on the 7:35 train from Adelaide, connecting into the Bud car to Port Augusta, and then I joined my trams at Port Augusta, not at Port Pirie. We are jumping. This is coming into Kalgoorlie from the Leonora line on a mixed train. The last one of two, I think, still running in the state. and too late, I can go back. You'll notice dog box style carriage and a water bag, canvas water bag, hanging to keep it cool. That was classic outback Australia. Oh, we are jumping. This is Widgymultha, which is the Kalgoorlie to Esperance railway. Although I wasn't on the train, I was on the bus, and it just happened that the bus was there and the train was there. I didn't get to travel to Esperance until it was a standard gauge railway, and I travelled there behind Pendennis Castle with Flying Scotsman as far as Widgymultha, and then the track wasn't authorised for that axle load further south. Back to Port Augusta. That's one of two that was surprisingly intact. That was the imported Pullman steel sleeping cars for the Overland, Mount Lofty and Macedon. And they'd both gone to Commonwealth Railways. Mount Lofty had not been touched. I wandered through inside. It was straight out of 1928, but I didn't take a photo.
Of course, Macedon is now preserved at the VGR.
Yep. Now, both of them were gutted and turned into supermarkets, and I've got shots, but not into night screening. So Macedon was restored from a shell. I'm not sure where Lofty is, but I don't think it's scrapped. I think it's still a supermarket shell, but not trading anymore. Because the workers who they were serving just aren't there. They use mechanised maintenance and don't have any workers in the field anymore. They were withdrawn from the Overland after a short life because they were heavy. In a period of coal shortages, these were twice the weight of the wooden carriages. Economically not justified. One of 6 Gloucester rail motors from the early 50s. Commonwealth Railways had them. North Australia and I think Tamari. What have we got there? That is the Prince of Wales car. The state car, royal car of the 1920s. And it's now been done up and it's available for charter at platinum class fares. Now, I still made some mistakes. I didn't do enough branch lines in either Queensland or Western Australia, but Meekatharra is one of those mystical destinations that just had to be visited. It was no longer a mixed. I was sleeping in the brake van on the slatted wooden floor. I blew up my airbed and discovered I hadn't brought the stoppers from Melbourne. Slept on the slats. That's much later at night. Even on a tripod, you can't get a good photo of an X-class Loco. They vibrated so much. The camera could be still, but the Loco wasn't. Again, we're all over the place. This is leaving Guildford at the end of my month in Western Australia, and they were busy modifying the station to convert the suburban lines for dual gauge to bring the standard gauge into Perth. That project was coming to fruition. Standard gauge was already working from Merredin to Fremantle for freight, for grain. And they were still working on the standard gauge east of Merredin. There, Big V. There's one of those at Ballarat. And what I hadn't realised, and which I'll work on later with a rescan, that's a pub in the background. This was a nice sign. You'll notice how they sneered at New South Wales. In fact, Kalgoorlie's platform was already eclipsed by then. It wasn't the longest in Australia, but certainly Albury wasn't. I think the longest in Australia was Perth Terminal. Port Pirie came well up, the new one, but they don't use it anymore. And Adelaide Parklands came well up.
What about the complete Flinders Street one west
Is
to
it still the
one
longest
east.
or not? I think it's been eclipsed. It got shortened, it got lengthened, then it got shortened, and of course that's the bits they don't use. You look, I'd have to look now, Floyd. It certainly is well up. The reason, of course, the national standard gauge.
They don't. While they only the centre part is used, 14 and one west are both out of use.
14 can be used when needed. One west can't be. But just they may not need to use 14, but they could if they wanted to.
No, not these days. 14 is booked out.
Oh, fully now as well. Right.
I believe so.
Right. But see, the typical Indian Pacific consist, was a block of 13 carriages, carefully juggled so that you had the right amount of berths for the dining car, and they would often run double consists of holidays, 26 carriages, and the platforms had to handle that. Then, so whatever 26 by 3/4 is, because they're all 75 metre carriages, 23 metre carriages. But occasionally after floods and disruptions they would run a triple set. Now that wouldn't fit into the platform at Port Augusta. Intending passengers were put on a taxi which drove down the service road to place them opposite their carriage. And that's exactly what Gann does at Darwin. Tassie Street Roundhouse at Port Augusta, dual gauge of course. Very complicated history, I won't go into it now. Carriage sheds at Port Pirie. Well, there may still have been an NM in that shed there, you just can't see it. It hadn't yet been. There were 2 NMs survived, both had been used in fan trips in the early 60s. One of them is now running on Pitchy Ritchie Tourist Railway, and the other is in, I think, the National Museum at Port Adelaide. Broad Arrow's the middle of nowhere, smaller than Manangatang. My mixed train, this one is a genuine mixed train, pulled in there and the ticket inspectors got on. And that still had a trading tea stall. That was nice. When the train arrived there, we had to wait a few minutes because the lady was collecting the milk for the cups of tea out of the refrigerated van on the mixed train. The power station, that was Western Australia's only electrified railway at the time, shunted for under a kilometre from the interchange sidings into the power station. The Loco's preserved in the Western Australian Railway Museum. The standard publicity shot. All of the publicity featured those observation cars, but you got them to trail only in one direction. In the other direction, they didn't turn them. Port Pirie did not have a triangle. And they aren't really a full observation car, it's just a slightly longer sleeping car with a small observation lounge in the extension, a bit like the cab of an Extrapolis suburban train. Back to Port Augusta. Now that G was the last surviving steam loco, I think, from the Trans-Australian steam era. It's now at Port Dock, Adelaide. That's a G, which was based on the New South Wales 32 class loco and was the original passenger loco for the Trans line. Got replaced in the 30s by the larger G class locos. Oh! The larger C class locos. Sorry, yeah, G's the... Western Australia was one of the earliest in Australia to turn its branch line services into buses there, with those Fodens from the early 50s. And into the 60s, there were 4 main railway routes running with overnight trains that have been upgraded, plus the Bunbury, the day train, and everything else was bus. And I did a lot of bus travel in Western Australia, heading to places where steam locos were running. Of course, same as Queensland, I'm doing this with an all lines ticket, which is a 1 month ticket, unlimited travel. I'm not sure how many of Australia's systems have them today. New South Wales has the Discovery Pass, which is the same thing. Fewer trains use it on the buses.
I looked into it when I was going to Queensland. If you're an international student, they have an equivalent, but it's not available for domestic use.
They've all been scaled back. Victoria's got scaled back and cut back and faded away. It may still exist, but you can't use it on trains in the peak period.
We do have an equivalent, sort of. We've got a yearly pass.
Ah, that's different again.
Yes, you can. You can get a yearly pass or a monthly pass, but I believe they're usually for I think they're usually for a set line. There's no. You may be able to purchase a monthly all lines equivalent, but I'm not exactly sure.
But now the rules change, and of course for a railway enthusiast, it's nearly all bus travel anyhow. You'd have to be a church addict going to places by bus to photograph the churches. Whereas New Zealand still has it. Very few train journeys you can make with it, but lots of buses. Europe still has Euro Pass, less and less convenient, but for most of the reviewers tonight, there's a good Euro Pass for under 26s, second class only. Otherwise it's fairly expensive and less convenient. So many trains now require you to reserve, and the reservations aren't cheap. You've lost that flexibility, the ability to change your mind on the run.
Well, I think with the New South Wales Discovery Pass, you still have to book, but you can, in theory, book 5 minutes before the train arrives. You just have to be, there just has to be space on board for you, that's all.
In India, the Indian one's now withdrawn, but I spent half a day in the office making a complicated set of reservations, which failed on the 48 hours into the program when the train ran late because of fog. It was fog bound, and thereafter I just gate crashed every train. I said, I have an in-rail pass, do you have a spot available? And the conductor always did, and didn't even ask for a tip or a bribe.
Gordon Ross has just commented that up in Queensland, for domestic travellers, you can buy a 2-for-1 fare on the Westlander, Inlander and Spirit of the Outback during the hot months.
Yes, which isn't quite the same thing. You can also get all lines tickets in USA and in Canada, but they've been nobbled since I went there. They're now sector fares. So the equivalent in Australia, if you go from Melbourne to Sydney, you use one sector off your ticket. But if you stop over in Albury, it's now a 2-sector journey. It's rather destroyed the concept. Other countries don't have them because the fares are so cheap anyhow. There was a South American one for a while, and I had one. In fact, I've had two, but that's been withdrawn. Oh, where are we? Mullawa. Now, what I was going to point out, but my planning for the Western Australian trip, there was no internet back in the days. You relied on what you'd seen at slide screenings at club meetings, and there wasn't all that much publishing, but there was a series of books put out by Jack Richardson, pictorials, and they were very affordable and very good and very tempting. He started with Australian Railways Today, and then went on to a series called Along the Line, which was state by state. And some of the names jumped out at me from those books, and when it was my time to go to Western Australia, there were places I wanted to see, and Mullawa was one of them. Which happened, of course, the line from Mullawa, that's the continuation to Meekatharra, and way back it used to go the whole way to Wailuna, really remote.
Of course, Wailuna, I think Wailuna is the start of the Canning stock route.
Yes, that's why it went there.
Right.
We did change the stock onto the railway.
Yes,
And today, it is still a centre. If you're flying a light plane from Western Australia to Queensland, for instance, or to Darwin, that's your refuelling stop. Now the Meekatharra line itself is gone. Stock will go by road, of course. Ooh, Perenjori. Now that's the typical Western Australian overnight train. 4 comfortable carriages and 12 bogie wagons. They always ran the train 16 carriages long, or 16 vehicles long. And every one of them, they had a proper club buffet lounge which could serve light meals, and that was all people needed. That's changed unrecognisably. That's the old Northern Station, which had only just been replaced. The Avon Valley deviation was commissioned in 1966. The station building has survived and is a museum. A lot of the original route to Northam is a walking trail through the Darling Ranges, and I've walked some of it. Including, it had Western Australia's only tunnel. $10.08. So I'm predicting it will run for another 30 minutes, I think, roughly. That's only an estimate. Or do you want another break? We've come for 30 minutes.
Yeah, sure, we'll have another couple minutes break. Looking at some comments. Matthew James says, Rod's knowledge is awesome. He also says, I've travelled on the Indian Pacific from Sydney to Perth, gold class. I absolutely loved it, and the food in the dining car is amazing. Yes, the how do I describe it? The false advertising of gold class. It's the lowest level of service that you can get on the GAN in the Union Pacific. Not quite false advertising, but
It's what can come beyond platinum when they want to go further up.
well, beyond platinum, they've got I don't know if they're still running it, but the John Forrest, I think it is, car.
Oh yeah, charter. That runs at platinum fares. I think you just got to have 8 people or whatever.
All right.
They've got 3 vehicles. One of them's the Prince of Wales carriage, which I showed earlier, but it can't run into Sydney. It's too wide. The only place it might be able to go to Perth, but really Darwin's its only available route.
Was the line to Darwin built with American loading gauge or narrower?
Yes.
American, right?
There's not a huge difference. There isn't really a huge difference, but when the Trams was built with some carriages were wider and some were longer and some were wider and longer, and some met the Australian standard. The first class sleepers off the German train could have gone anywhere. They were the same dimensions as the Overland and subsequently the Aurora carriages.
Well, I think at some point, either some, the BG, well, some Overland carriages were reclassified to BG and put on the Trams.
Now, that was the D cars from South Australia, very similar to the Overland cars. They came off the same jigs, but had more seats.
No, I think there are, well, yes, that's right, there was some Ds. I believe some originally O and J cars were reclassified to BG at some point.
No, it didn't happen.
Okay. I know that the carbon steel carriages were built wider than the fluted stainless steel.
I don't know. I'm not sure which ones we're on. That's the BAs.
Yeah, I'm. Yes, I think you're right.
They had only 48 seats, but they had showers for the second class peasants. And only 5 of them. And yes, they couldn't go into Sydney, for instance. They were a failure when they were built, and I still don't know why. So they had a fairly varied life.
Stephen was saying that Mount Lofty still survives, plus Macedon and Adelaide.
Yep.
He says Adelaide is in the Port Adelaide Railway Museum, and Mount Lofty, I think, is still at Port Augusta. And he's heard that Mount Lofty will enter preservation with the VGR, but can't confirm.
I've actually heard the same story too. Same owners, same upgrade. I don't know quite what's paying for it all, but yeah, they're going to do another one. Right, let's keep going.
Well, hang on, we've got a couple more comments.
Oh, a couple. Oh, right, that's all right. You can see, I can't.
Yeah. So Patrick Robertson says, I have camped by the Indian Pacific and gotten woken up by the train. I once camped at Little River. I went there with my mate Tom, and the occasion was, it was the final days, if not the final day, of intermodal Horizon trains interstate. So we found a good camp trackside, and yeah, it was a good night.
I was at Port Augusta on my way to Pitchy Ritchie once. We happened to see a train go through and didn't realise its importance. It was the inaugural SCT.
Stephen was asking about Maryborough's platform length.
Oh, nowhere in the no. I've got it all as an article. Mary. It wasn't even the longest in Victoria, I think. But yeah.
Well, Flinders Street was certainly longer.
Oh yeah, and I'm not sure. I've got all the figures somewhere, just not in the top of my head. And I'm not sure quite where the new Brisbane platform, whatever they number it, the long distance platform, I'm not sure where it comes in. It can hold 20 carriages, but they're not long carriages.
Stephen asks, does Rod have any photos of Pendennis Castle?
Yes, but not in tonight's screening.
He says, technically Horizon trains are back in Victoria, but as One Rail, as Horizon has bought the company.
And which in its own right, it was a renaming of something.
Genesee and Wyoming, Australia. That's what One Rail was, a renaming of GWA.
Right.
All right, we're ready to keep going.
Oh, on we roll. I think Clack Line is where the rail trail runs out, but I haven't got that far. I don't think I made it to Clack Line. It was only a one-day hike. No, I was coming into town by bus, and there was a suburban transfer freight. They were still running then. Towards the end of this holiday, I was approached by a railway official at Perth Station and says, "Are you the young guy from Melbourne who's been travelling all over the state?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Head office wants to speak with you." They wanted to interview me on television, which they did. They also gave me a good bundle. I made sure I got benefits, working timetables, publicity brochures, the lot. And I was interviewed. Anyway, fronted up to the station, and there was the railway official saying, "Oh, here's one of our nice new stainless steel suburban rail motors. We'll stand in front of that for the interview." And I said, "There's a lovely old steam loco shunting. Let's stand in front of that." I think the official won. So they were doing suburban transfers, and I think they were doing carriage shunting as well. But they'd been evicted from East Perth Loco Depot, which was under demolition for the new standard gauge terminal, and they were operating out of a temporary depot at Midland Railway Workshops. That's an old former Midland Railway loco, still in Midland Railway livery. That's Leonora. I think, I'm not sure whether that loco went to the Bassendean Museum, or whether it's just preserved at Leonora. Ran on a firewood line, I think. Back to platform lengths. In fact, I never got to ride the Westland. I always rode the Kalgoorlie because it cost less. And it had some pretty antique carriages. Oh, that's what is it, a 24-wheel derailment? It's a 2-do, 2-loco. Which means what? 8 axles, 16 wheels, and every one of them is off. It was in the depot, but they had to re-rail it while I waited. It had blocked the exit from the depot of the loco that was to haul my train. So I think they were trying the classic railway, put in the packing pieces and tow it on up the ramp across the packing pieces, and I think they did succeed because I did leave. They slewed a siding to do it, to get the loco out. Quicker than re-railing the loco was slewing a siding to get... There's a steam loco there. I got there by bus. Now that was a night where I camped out in my sleeping bag on the lee side of an agricultural machine in the yard. Just like Floyd, except it wasn't as cold. Just like what Floyd at Longreach, wasn't it? Somewhere you were in a hike tent.
Yeah, I think I was. Well, I think. Where was I in a hike tent? Charleville, I think I was in a hike tent. I was in a hike tent for as much as I could because that was always going to be the cheapest option. Apart from, ironically, there was some places like Townsville which had a caravan park, but the unpowered caravan site was more expensive than the Airbnb which I got.
Yes, well, I didn't have a hike tent, so back in the days, and again for the young brigade, you could usually sleep in a van in the yard, or the ladies' waiting room in the station, or a carriage. So I hadn't taken the hike tent, and that was one night where there was no other option but to sleep in the open. But it was midsummer.
I think I was in a hike tent at Charleville, Longreach, not Mount Isa, I don't think.
And in
No.
New South Wales, I think I was on an overnight train every night for 30 consecutive nights. Queensland wasn't quite as intensive because it had to be static some nights. In Western Australia, I was staying with my ritzy relatives in Dalkeith, which is the second most expensive suburb in Perth. So when I was visiting my relatives, I was very welcome. We had lots of social activity, but I had to do a sponge wash in the men's toilets at Perth Station just to be presentable to appear at their house for a proper shower. But they were my great aunts. They were my paternal grandfather's sisters. This is a bit of the bypassed previous main line now that the Avon Valley deviation was there. There are some video clips around. It was double track, power signalling. It was a classy line, but all gone. I've got shots of Flying Scotsman here. Not sure if I've got Pendennis Castle here. Another fallen flag, Neptune petrol. Classic gaggle of buses. There was no commuter train in that era. I'm not quite sure why Northern had the bus depot. They should have been coming out of Perth. They may have just been commuter running. Again, Northam's like Ballarat, for instance, Geelong or Ballarat, and it's gained a commuter service since. Ah, the lovely shopper, a cult train. They had 6 sets of wildflowers, and in the early 50s they did some of the long distance minor routes, but those routes went to bus. But it was my first time. The shopper, which was the day return from Bunbury to Perth, it had vending machines in a carriage, and I've still got the packet in which the sandwiches were delivered. English electric propulsion, and it was on 6-axle bogies to minimise the axle load for the lines on which they were built. The relevant trailers were in use as sitting cars on those overnight trains, except with the 4 kept for the Bunbury and the others went to overnight trains. The former East Perth Loco depot, not much of it left. There's the powerhouse to give you some bearings. But that site is the standard gauge station, and the suburban tracks were relocated to the river side of the easement. The southern line, not all the way to Albany, was still a steam enclave, and the Bunbury and Collie areas. Again, it's a Midland Loco, only the lettering has been changed. It's still maroon and cream. And it's English electric. I think they got the 12, so there were 2 sizes. They got the 12 cylinder. Queensland had some. The Austerland was their pride and joy. It was fast. Had 2 buffets, but each was only half size. I think there was once a refreshment room there back in the days. Proper dining room too, not just tea stall. Had to take that one. Put it in a joke pairing sometime. I went there by train, I came back by bus. And in the morning they couldn't start the bus. It was their newest Hino, the pride and joy of the fleet. And after 2 hours of having trouble, up came a rabbit shooter's truck, totally decrepit, straight out of a Ken Maynard cartoon, and it gave us a roll start. And interestingly, on those back roads, we made up the whole 2 hours. We were flying. It had been a junction, but both of the lines had been closed. Peak Hill was a mine, and was much shorter. Back to Mullawa of course, that was Western Australia's own. I think it's iron ore, not any other mineral, going into Geraldton for export. Again, I wasn't travelling on it. It just happened the bus on which I was riding ran parallel with it. Might be bauxite. There's bauxite further south. At Eneabba there were mineral sands. I got there on a charter train years later. That gives you a much better idea. Now, in fact, this is the Midlander, which, while upgraded in the same way as the others, was using former Midland Railway carriages. Be a first-class sleeper, second-class sleeper, buffet lounge, and a sitting car, which I think may have been only second class. There was no first-class sitting. Sleepers from this and the others ended up in the ARHS fleet and were used for weekend charters, and I did a few of those before mainline running was effectively banned. Now that is a former Sentinel steam rail motor. Western Australia had only one, Tasmania had a fleet, but that's no longer got steam propulsion. It was converted to the track recorder car and was towed by a Loco. Notably, that Loco, which was unique, if I can get it right, it was built as a tender Loco, was converted to a tank Loco, was an oil burner. So the unique Loco, the orphan Loco, is running on an orphan duty. Again, I can't guess how close we are to the end. Just, I'm estimating from my sense of judgment pressing the click button that we can't be far off the end of the set. The crane you can see on the right was the coal grab. Western Australian collie coal would dry out and blow away as dust. It was always stored in either an enclosed overhead hopper, enclosed, or underwater. And so that is running over, that's going to retrieve the coal from under the water to load it into steam tenders. Back to the powerhouse. I can't recall now whether that was 1500 volt DC, but far more likely to be 600 volts DC, which was another world standard used mainly on tramways. When Perth electrified, those went to Auckland and revitalised completely the Auckland suburban service, and revitalised it so well that it was justifiable to electrify it. The thought was that they might send them on to Christchurch and do the same job there. But that didn't happen. I think the earthquake got in the way. Kalgoorlie. The standard gauge platforms at Kalgoorlie had been built for the Kalgoorlie suburban service and were converted, which is why they were fairly short, and the trains had to dock in two portions and put the two together before leaving. Leonora is famous for another point in history. They trade on it. The future president, United States president, I've just forgotten his name, was a mining engineer and was here for a period, which is why I think Leonora has a hotel called the White House Hotel. Hoover, President Hoover. Now what I did here, I left all of my camping gear in the carriage. I walked from Leonora to the nearby Gawlia to get the shot of the train arriving, and then reboarded. The the Gawlia Hotel is one of the famous ones on Australian pub calendars. The W was a very prolific class. I think Western Australia had 6 of them and Silverton had 3. And the one that runs on Pitchy Ritchie, looking like a Silverton W, is actually a Western Australian W with the skyline casing rebuilt. So I'm flashing a little bit to reach... Ah! Bother! My fault. I was flashing fast, yes, backwards. It wasn't till a much later holiday that I went to Rottnest, for instance, or the Pilbara. Those came up. And I've never done the Indian Pacific, Sydney to Perth. I've done it Port Pirie to Sydney, and I've done it Port Pirie to Perth. I think I've done it Adelaide to Perth. When I went in 1969, this holiday, of course, it was the Trams, and second class sleepers were 2-berth roomettes. So you had to spend most of the time in the lounge if you wanted to look out at both sides of the train. I got fouled up by a train strike in the southwest. That's shunting the train, but won't be running it. The train will run with an X-class diesel. I think I was at Bridgetown by bus on a day when everything was dead. This was the strike in action. Oh, sorry, is that one word or two? Now, one of those lines is now a tourist line, and I've done it on the tourist rail motor. The famous Bustleton Pier, a tourist attraction today, and I think it's the same length. It's never been shortened. That was our long hike. It's got a tourist train that runs on it.
Roughly how long is it?
Over a kilometre. There's lots on it on the web because it's a tourist attraction.
Well, I know the Port Welshpool Long Jetty, I think that was 1.4 kilometres long at its peak, although that never carried a railway. Built with the, the provision for a railway, but never actually carried one.
was a fish jetty, they often did have trolleys because that's how you brought the baskets of fish to shore.
They didn't have any sort of trolley track. It was primarily built as a deep water pier, a deep water jetty. Of course, there was the smaller jetty, which the what do you call it? The VR narrow gauge, horse-drawn tram, whatever you want to call it, ran onto.
So I might have a photo of the long jetty, but it was closed off to the public when I was there. You couldn't walk to the end. I believe it's been revived.
It has. I went there, maybe a year or two before it was revived, and it was closed off to the public for sure. And a major part of it was completely burnt out. However, the B&B that I was staying at had a kayak, and so I got on the kayak and I paddled out and climbed up the piers and got myself onto the decrepit jetty.
Oh, magnificent!
So yes, I've got footage of that, and that'll be I'll probably release a video of that in December. And maybe a year ago, I went back with my brother to the Restored Jetty. They've resurfaced the entire length with concrete.
Gosh!
Rather than it was a very expensive restoration.
For what benefit?
Tourists, and my God, it was popular.
What, just people walking it?
Yeah, it was. It was a nice day. It was, I think it was November. It was. I don't remember it being particularly warm, and it was very windy, but hugely popular. So yes, they resurfaced most of it with concrete, or all the parts which you can access, which is, I think, maybe 50 metres beyond the winch house. And then they left a few of the piers beyond that as a display without a decking. And then I think some of the piers beyond that were completely dismantled. So its current length is, I think, around 1.1 kilometres, with about 300 metres of which has been demolished.
The other long one in Australia is, Port Germain, and that's a tourist attraction. That's South Australia, between Port Pirie and Port Augusta. Now I'm flashing through a little bit fast now, conscious of the time. We probably overdid it. We should have done just Western Australia tonight. It's very hard to judge the timing when I'm doing it to an internet audience. When I'm with a live audience, you can judge the timing better. But traditionally, we count 6 seconds per slide in a railway enthusiast gathering. But I'm not counting to 6 each time. East Perth, I think. Yep.
Dennis Former has said the Busseltown Jetty, the Busselton Jetty is the largest timber-piled jetty in the Southern Hemisphere at 1,841 metres long, according to Google.
Oh, good, yes. Nice for doing that on the run. And it's all there. We can't be far off the end, but I've got no way of judging how much because they don't show in sequence, we haven't seen the last surviving steam-worked forest railway yet, which was, in the holiday context, was about the last night before I left, and was no longer running into the forest. It was just shunting from the mill to the interchange sidings, and it was done up as a working museum of industrial equipment and was destroyed by a fire about going close to 10 years ago now. Obviously, now that is my leaving, my last view of the old Midland station. The new interchange had been built several years earlier, but this one was still in use for 2 trains a day because it was opposite the workshops, and it was the change of shift for the workers. But that's not a workers' train, that's the Kalgoorlie. I'm leaving Perth. Oh, back to Port Augusta and the start. These are all over the place. Former joint stock carriage, went to SAR, went to Commonwealth Railways and just fell apart. SAR, mate, it probably was used by South Australia, but Commonwealth never used it. That's the cinema car. That was a form of joint stock AE, converted to be the cinema car to show films, 16mm films, to workers across the Trams. It got superseded by video, and then, of course, there were no workers. Lounge car. I predict then, the way this is working, we've got about 10 more frames. They rode well. They were good vehicles. And of course they got, apart from going to Woomera, when the Whyalla line was built, a passenger service was put onto the Whyalla line. These went there. Original trans carriage. I think they were all end platform as built, but the end platforms got enclosed. There were 4 of them built in the 30s. 2 of them got converted to be power vans. They were brake van and crew accommodation for the dining car staff. They had 2 cabins with 4 berths each for the dining car staff. A different screening another time. RTA used 2 of those carriages to cross the Nullarbor attached to a freight train. Magnificent trip. Easter 1984. Imported from Reading Railroad. Used as rail motor trailers. You've seen one of those way back at the start. I think that one, the funny dangling apparatus, was being converted for weed spraying, or had been converted. Oh my gosh. I think they were built by Tulloch, and they were just as much a failure there as anywhere else where Tulloch built anything. They were probably too gutless for Commonwealth Railways, so just... Now those had a long and successful, Sulzer diesel, long and successful career. That's the school train.
There's still a couple of NTs in service, I think.
All right. Because the peninsular lines have gone.
Well, I think the couple that are left are working on the gypsum trains on Eyre Peninsula. The couple that are left.
Oh, there is still some working out there at the gypsum end.
At the gypsum end, there is, yeah.
An isolated railway.
Mm-hmm.
That's got its own interesting geography. I've been there. I've been on a Kevin gypsum train after the Ceduna area was reconfigured. I've done the new route, not the old. Boy, I'm just as confused as the readers or the viewers, but there's just not time in this world to turn everything into a neat PowerPoint presentation. As I said, when I was offered to do this for Floyd, it'll be a warts and all screening, knowing the limitations of the method. Oh, 10:51. Oh, we should never have had those breaks. Or we should have done only Western Australia.
Yes, I think the trams killed half an hour, 40 minutes. Oh, there's the end.
And that is the end. But it's good nostalgia for me. A lot of what I did then, of course, you can't do today, or you can't afford to do it. But it was a grand adventure. Highly nostalgic now, and I've been back to Perth several times since, and the Western Australian relatives have come to Victoria, and the rest of my family followed me west and met the relatives themselves. Right, well, I'll leave it to... Now, I'll stop the screen share.
Okay. There's a couple of comments. Gordon Ross, in relation to platform lengths, was saying that Roma Street long distance platform 9 can take the electric tilt set and the diesel tilt at the same time.
Yep. Now, they're 23 metres long.
Right.
But I think there are only 7 carriages per set. That's only 14 carriages. Spencer Street can do... Melbourne Southern Cross could do that.
Yes, how many carriages what's the longest? 3? 3 or 4 is the longest current platforms at Southern Cross?
No, I think one is still longer.
Not
one, two.
No.
Two.
2.
How have they numbered them? 1 is the dock platform, 2 is the main,
yep.
I think 2 still beats 3, 4.
Right.
Of course, I'm not looking... How am I doing? Speaker, gallery... Alright, I've just gone to gallery view, but I'm not seeing anybody else.
Well, that's because nobody else is here.
They're not logged into me, they're logged into you. Yep.
Yep.
So,
Stephen says, luckily the UT tank Loco is preserved along with a regular U-class Loco.
Yeah, I think there were about 10 U-class locos, and they were fast passenger locos. They hauled the inaugural Austral end until the diesels came.
Dennis Formers says, Rod, your knowledge and memory is incredible. A true Australian railways legend, a walking museum on our railways. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, how nice. Made it worth the effort.
And finally, Stephen... Oh, you say what you're saying?
I was just saying, and remember, I'm doing this to give Floyd some breathing space to finish his uni year.
Second last, Stephen says, Rod, do you have any photos of the Ballarat Loco with 2 A's?
One at when it was preserved at Busselton. It was still there. I've got a shot of it at Busselton, but obviously not scanned. There are photos.
And Gordon Ross finally says, fascinating viewing yet again. Rod, thank you for sharing your knowledge and images. Looking forward to the next instalment.
Yep, there was lots more available. Anyway, we mustn't spend all night saying the farewells. Time to finish neatly.
Yep, so I'll just finish off by saying that I won't be holding a live stream of any kind in 2 weeks' time because I will be at a high school reunion. But we should resume in 4 weeks' time, which is December the 9th, if I remember correctly, whatever the first Friday of December is, or no, it'd be the second Friday of December, wouldn't it? Might as well look that up. The 10th. That's why I'm thinking of the 9th, because the 9th of December is my Light Railways research presentation. So anyone who wishes to join in on that is going to be a Zoom meeting, not broadcast to YouTube, it's going to be recorded and uploaded to YouTube eventually, not on my YouTube channel, but on the Light Railways YouTube channel. If anyone wants to join that, Thursday the 9th of December, if you just go to lrrsa.com.org.au, you should be able to find it under events. Anyone can join. You just need to register. Although having said that, the meeting is limited to 100 participants. So if you do want to get in, I suggest you get in fairly early. The registrations are unlimited, but once we hit that 100 cap on the night, people get locked out, which did happen last meeting, so could well happen again. But I will be presenting my hike along the Yin tramway. I believe I have. I've previously gone through a few of my photos and videos from my hike. I'll be pretty much doing the same with some added bits and pieces here and there. So join in with that if you so wish. We'll resume live streaming as normal on the 10th, which is the following day, Friday. Haven't decided on a topic yet, of course. We'll decide that much closer to the time. And I think that's it. Yeah. Righto. Stephen says, already booked, looking forward to it. Perfect. And he also says that Ballarat is doing much better being preserved and undercover at Bustleton. Okay, that's it, everyone. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in 4 weeks' time. Or maybe 4 weeks minus 1 day. See you then. Bye-bye.